Hello everyone, this will be a video on the Nighthawk. I wanted to kind of go over the Nighthawk. I've actually been flying this for since at least May, at least before the command ship buffs, because I think there was some interesting things you could do with the Nighthawk that a lot of people weren't doing before. So this is kind of the fit that I'm using right now. So I guess to go over a few things, the changes to the Nighthawk were it went from a 7.5% bonus of rate of fire to 10%, and it also has an extra mid slot. So it lost one low slot and gained one mid slot, which was really helpful. It didn't gain any fitting, so this is actually a very tight ship to fit, especially for, if you're wanting to basically do anything other than fit it with buffer modules. It does not scale well with active tanks. But the one thing that I found the Nighthawk to be really good at is burst damage. It's not in fleets. Yes, it's really good for like sustain because you have a lot of buffer to work with. But for solo and small gang, which it really didn't see much use in before the command ship buffs, is it's really good at as being a burster. So basically, everything about it relies on just maxing out the damage it can do and maxing out the tank it can do in a short period of time. So for what I've been using here lately, and even before the command ship buffs, there was a little bit of, couple small changes with the mid slot change. But this is what I've pretty much been using for the past 6 months, 8 months or so. Basically just a single XL ASB and an invuln scram web micro jump drive. So if you ignore this domination EM amp, these 5 modules here is how it was fit before, except I just had an EM rig instead. But now that EM mid slot has really kind of bumped up the potential tank I can get out of it. It covers the EM resist hole pretty well. But again, I have this fit for pretty much max tank, max DPS in a short period of time. Pretty much almost exclusively using rage heavy assault missiles for Scourge, because that's what you're bonus to. However, even if you're not using Scourge, you have a really good DPS even for non-kinetic damage. So in this case, using Scourge with in triple BCUs, you have roughly 1200 DPS. If you heat, then you go up to 1379 DPS, and I normally use a 3 to 5% pyro, which gets you to 1400 DPS. So essentially, you are a pocket battleship. You do a lot of damage. I mean, even like my torpedo battleships, like the Raven Navy issue, does about 1500 DPS. Whereas this is only about 100 DPS less than that. And then for your tank, again, single XL ASB, I have the fit design where I'm always using blue pill. So if a fight starts, and I'm going to be using improved blue pill or standard blue pill just to bump up my tank that extra little bit. Again, just so I can survive long enough to kill what I need to kill and then micro jump drive out. Even like, so for example, since I was talking about the non-scourge ammo, let's just plug that in here real quick so you can see. So using non-scourge ammo heated, you're doing still over 1000 DPS. So that's really, really good for, people thinking they can take advantage of the kinetic lock when you're still doing really good damage, even not using kinetic ammo, just because you're basically getting a 50% rate of fire bonus. Only one link, just because the other shield links don't really help a whole lot, and you have very limited fitting. So there's not really, the extension buffer link isn't going to help really because you're more active tanking, and then the active tank link doesn't help because you're using an XL ASB. So again, doesn't really matter in that situation. The disadvantages of the Nighthawk. So you see, this DPS, you're like, oh wow, it's a lot of damage, be able to kill everything. Well, the disadvantage here is that if you're heating, because the Nighthawk is a 50% rate of fire bonus, you're going to burn your weapons extremely quickly. So again, kind of going with that whole bursting theme, if you don't kill anything by the time you run out of heat, you're kind of starting to look into trouble because you can't get that big damage bump anymore. With heat, you're only, well, with heat on the missile launchers here, with the Nighthawk's bonuses, you get a 1.43 second rate of fire, which is insane. And this isn't like a decked out Nighthawk. This is a triple T2 BCU, so you have no abyssals. I don't have any implants in relating to rate of fire. So if you scaled that other stuff, like if you got rate of fire rolled abyssal modules and implants, you might potentially get below 1 second, which would just basically just be spitting missiles. Other than that, though, the other thing to mention here is that the Nighthawk gets the explosion radius bonus, which I added the rigger rig just to enable me to stay using the rage missiles pretty much, as much as I want. Even in fights against frigates, there's some situations where I fight frigates and I don't even switch to faction ammo because I just don't need it. Both with the Nighthawk bonus and then the rigger, and then I also use crash. So it's overall it's a flexible hull. It's not well known what it can do, so it's semi-easy to get fights in. Some people are hesitant on it, but otherwise, it's a fun ship to fly in, and it's not as intimidating as like a typical battleship. In the first fight with the Nighthawk, I was roaming around through our nullsec static, and I was kind of hanging around in this area for 10-15 minutes, kind of hanging out in the more populated systems, and when no one decided to fight, I went ahead and warped off, and I noticed a pacifier started following me. Or actually, I cross-jumped a pacifier, and I noticed as I was jumping through that gate to the next system, his speed jumped up, meaning he was burning back to the gate. So I went a couple more jumps, and he kept following me, and I mean, the only reason a solo pacifier is going to follow you is because they've got a Sino or they're going to hot drop you. So I assumed I was going to get hot dropped, but I went ahead and baited him a couple more systems to see if he would actually tackle me, and he does finally tackle me. I start out just by kind of slow boating towards him, seeing what he's going to do, and he does finally point me, at which point I go ahead and start tackle him, and then I start shooting him. It's actually nice of him because he's double long point fit, he has no scram, and he burns towards me. He could have just stayed at range and I wouldn't have been able to shoot him. In this case though, I'm still using Scourge Rage right now, or Rage missiles, but I go ahead and MJD before he even dies because I'm expecting the blobs to come through and the two Panthers come through here. So at this point I was thinking of warping off, but I've run across a situation like this before in my Barghest where I'm able to isolate a Black Ops battleship. So I actually wait a little bit and I go ahead and look at the Panthers. One of them's warping off right now, but one of them's still there, and I was thinking maybe one of them would try to MJD to me, but neither one of them had an MJD. So I kind of start weighing my options. I also notify my corp that there's some Panthers in the system next door, and I look at the fit, and the pacifier dropped a lot of shiny stuff. So I figure a good method I can use to bait one of the Blop's battleships back in is to go and loot the pacifier wreck. So I go ahead and bookmark the wreck, and then I warp to the planet just to so I can warp back in. And during that time I'm also repairing my modules for the inevitable fight, and I'm checking D-scan and notice that the Panther is back on scan, so I go ahead and prepare and warp back to the gate. The footage is split here just because I stopped and started re-recording, and when I come back, the Panther, I land at the wreck, and the Panther is 12 kilometers from me, so that's kind of the perfect situation here. I go ahead and lock him, and he burns towards me, and I tackle him. And now that he's tackled, I go ahead and consume my blue pill and my pyro. And I don't heat immediately because I was thinking he was armor tanked. but actually I see that it's taking me longer to get through his shield than I expected. And then around this time, a bomber jumped through as well, so I was tanking both this Blob's battleship and the bomber at the same time. The Blobs is actually fit for max DPS, as it was triple gyro, double drone damage amps, but he didn't actually put damage drones on me, he just put EC drones on me. And then as the Panther's about to die, the bomber warps off. I'm not sure why, he might have maybe figured he was about to die when I switched targets, but I was able to warp out right as that second Panther landed, and was able to get away here. So even under about 2000 DPS, I was still able to tank long enough through my XLASP because I only had one charge left. But that kind of goes along with what I was talking about with the Nighthawk being a really good burst ship, is that I was able to tank that 2000 DPS long enough to kill that Blobs and get out of there, before his second Panther showed up, which could have potentially killed me. It still might have been a little close, but I think he would have killed me because I only had one charge left. In this next fight, I stumbled across a gate camp when I was roaming around in one of my combat interceptors. So I reshipped into the Nighthawk and then just warped directly into their bubble or their gate camp. And once I landed, they had a MOA sitting there with a Vagabond sitting at range. So I go ahead and lock up the MOA and get ready to kill him here. I don't pulse my links until I have them tackled, just to make sure they don't run away from me. And once I tackle the MOA, then a Stratios decloaks. So I go ahead and burn this MOA down really fast. It actually doesn't really have a lot of tank, it's just a single large shield extender because he had a SIBO. And then I focus on killing the Stratios. The Stratios was 1600 fit plate with a reactive armor hardener, and he was set up for remote repping. But he didn't have his buddy Stratios with him. So what this ends up happening is that he's kind of isolated and not able to get reps. And the reactive armor hardener does kind of kick in about 50% armor, and it takes me a little bit to chip through him, even with all the damage. You can kind of see the other Stratios pops up here pretty quickly after I kill him, and he doesn't really do anything, he just kind of sits there. This is mainly just because, again, they're set up for remote rep, so because his other guy died, he doesn't really have anything to do, and I think he might have been multi-boxing because he doesn't even target me or try and do damage to me. At this point, I am a little bit low on XLASB charges, so I focus on killing this last MOA. I can't scram him, but I think he's in the bubble at this point, and I can get a web on him, so that means I can get really good application on him. And at this point, I need to try and get out of here, but the Stratios might have a scram on him, so I kind of bluff a little bit, and I continue shooting at him, and to make him think that I still have tank. And he starts to burn away from me, at which point I activate the MJD to kind of get out of there before anyone can scram me. And then at that point I just warp off and get safe to reload the XLASB, and by then they all kind of leave system, and I was able to get away from them. This fight starts when I'm going through our wormhole chain, and I noticed that there was a Typhoon on scan, so I warped to this nullsec hole, and there's a Typhoon and an Inyo there. So I go ahead and this is also in a Magnetar, so it's a C3 Magnetar if I remember correctly, which basically, for anyone not familiar with Magnetars, just means that everything does more damage, but you have worse application. So one thing about the Nighthawk that I haven't really touched on is the really high thermal and kinetic resistances that it has. With this fit, you have about a 91% thermal resistance. So hybrid ships you're pretty much immune to. And in the case of this fight here, this Typhoon was shooting me with Inferno cruise missiles. So not only was there an Inyo that was doing very little damage, even though it was in a Magnetar, so it was actually doing extra damage, but then the Typhoon is also shooting me into my highest resistance, so I'm able to mitigate a lot of their damage, even though we're in a wormhole that is increasing damage. In this case, so I'm kind of hugging the wormhole because the Typhoon is also hugging the wormhole, so I expect he's going to jump out as soon as he gets low, which he does right here. So I go ahead and follow him, hoping that I spawn close to him so that I can scram him. But once we jump through here, the Typhoon is 14 kilometers from me, so there's not really a whole lot I can do to catch him. I lock him up, and I'm hoping maybe he'll re-engage, but I mean I don't see why he would. He's at really low armor, and he goes ahead and warps off. But at this point I check the hull to make sure that it's not crit or reduced, because I was thinking maybe they were rolling the hull, but the hull checks out fine. And so this kind of picks up where the second part of the fight happens. So they come back with 2 Inyos, a Moa, and the Typhoon again. And this time I switch my ammo to explosive damage to kill the Inyos because the Scourge damage just wasn't cutting it. The Inyos are focusing on kind of killing my drones. And, again, now you have 2 Inyos, a Moa, and the Typhoon all shooting thermal and kinetic damage at me, and which is why I'm barely having to pulse XLASB in this situation. So I get through the 2 Inyos. This last one's a little stubborn because of the ADCU, and again, because we're still in that Magnetar, I don't have as good application anymore. This is also the older Nighthawk fit before command ships were buffed, so I don't have the rigor on this fit, I believe. I'm actually starting to get a little bit of newt pressure though, and if I stay any longer, it's possible he could newt me out, and then I won't be able to micro jump. So I notice that the Moa is kind of burning back into my missile range, and instead of focusing on the Typhoon, I go ahead and just put all my damage on the Moa, even though he's not tackled. And then I notice that my cap's really low here, so I go ahead and activate the MJD. And because of all the damage I'm doing here, I'm able to kill the Moa right as my MJD cycles and get out before I'm completely neuted out by the Typhoon. And this next fight starts out with me I was being chased by a VNI, an Ares, and an Arazu. The Arazu was trying to Sino on me, but they couldn't catch me within like 4 or 5 jumps. And I went into the system where our wormhole was, and then I just warped to an ESS. That way the Arazu couldn't Sino within the ESS. Then I let myself get tackled by the VNI, and I think this is kind of a good example of kind of what can happen when you run out of heat. So you can see in the initial fight with this VNI that I was able to get him into structure pretty quickly. But once once I couldn't rely on heat anymore, or I didn't want to risk burning out my launchers, then you can kind of see that 200 or 300 DPS kind of drops off. I'm not able to punch through his reps, as this VNI is basically all tank. He has no damage mods, and I think he's using like electron blasters or something like that. So again, you can kind of see that just losing out on that heat damage because of the rate of fire bonus, just because it uses your heat up so quick, can kind of be a disadvantage. I do eventually whittle the VNI down. I think once his the ancillary armor rep runs out, I'm able to finally break him there. And then in this case, the Ares is close by, so I can scram him. And I don't have him webbed, and this is still using rage heavy assault missiles, and I was able to kill him really quick there. And at this point I go ahead and warp out, because this Arazu only has a scram, so if he gets within 25-30 kilometers, then he can scram me, and potentially he could have ran me and died too, but I didn't want to take the chance of just being held down indefinitely at scram range and not reach him, since my missiles wouldn't be able to project that far. So I go ahead and warp off and get safe. And the next few fights here are all kind of together. I ran across a gang in a wormhole, and the first part of it was this Proteus, and I think this is kind of a good example of using the non-kinetic ammo. and this is also a really good matchup because Proteus has to shoot it into my highest resists when I can switch to explosive ammo and shoot into his lower resists. Unfortunately, in this case, though, because it happened on a wormhole, he was able to jump through. I tried jumping in to follow him, and he just cloaks and warps off on the other side. So, unfortunately, he was able to get away from there, from at least that initial fight. I go ahead and slow boat back to the hole to, see if there's anything else on the other side. And once I get to the other side, I do end up running across a Stratios. Kind of the same situation. Unfortunately, again, he's also sitting at 0 on the hole, and once he gets low enough, he just kind of jumps through. But I'm still fighting these separate ships all at the same time, and none of them are really doing a whole lot of damage, and I'm able to do a lot of damage to them. And then on the last fight here, I do actually, one of their jackdaws polarizes himself, and I am able to kill the jackdaw here. So not the greatest of fights, but I think it just really helps to showcase how useful or how powerful the resistances are on the Nighthawk when you are dealing with hybrid ships. And this last video here isn't really something I would consider unique to the Nighthawk. It's just something that I get asked on occasion as to like how I roam or catch people with no prop, since I'm only using a micro jump drive. So in situations like this where I am running across, in this case it's a ratting ship, but this could apply to miners or anything like that, anything that I'm just trying to use to start a fight, I always warp to them at 100. So this does two things. One, they don't really know what I'm doing at 100 kilometers, so it kind of gives them a false sense of security. And two, if you warp at 0 with no prop, most often they're going to be like 10, 15, 20 kilometers away from you. Whereas if you warp at 100, you're more likely to be within that 10 kilometer window with the MJD, to where you can just immediately MJD and then scram. Which is, what happened here is as soon as I MJD'd, I was in scram range and I could tackle. So, again, this isn't really to showcase a good fight. This is more just explaining, this is a method you can use to catch people without relying on a micro warp drive or an afterburner for when you're wanting to brawl people. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up this video. I'm just going to kind of leave this video off with this fight against Ahila and the new winter sites here, or the winter events. Basically, he warped into me after I spooked him out of the site and only had like 2 XLA speed charges left. So, but I mean, I was able to punch through his tank before he punched through mine, even though I only had 2 XLA speed charges. But anyways, just wanted to showcase the Nighthawk. I think it's a underrepresented ship. Has a lot of strengths to it. Works really well now in solo and small gang. Even like something I haven't touched on yet was like the heavy missile fit. The heavy missile fit, if you do like a kitey fit, is also really strong. You can get up to like 900 DPS with Fury missiles. So again, it's still a very, very competent ship no matter how you fit it. Along with its original strengths as being more of a fleet orientated ship. But again, I just think it's a really fun ship to use. The rate of fire bonus helps make it flexible without needing to always use kinetic missiles. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and probably have Caldari Interceptor video next as the next PvP video here. So see y'all later.